Socialist realism is the basic method of Soviet literature and literary criticism. It demands of the artist the truthful, historically concrete representation of reality in its revolutionary development. Moreover, the truthfulness and historical concreteness of the artistic representation of reality must be linked with the task of ideological transformation and education of workers in the spirit of socialism. This is the definition of socialist realism as proclaimed at the First All-Union Congress of Soviet Writers in 1934. It's a cultural doctrine adopted by the Soviet Union that didn't only apply to the literary world, but also to theater, music, and importantly for this video, visual arts. In this video, we'll be taking a brief look at socialist realism. We'll be looking at how it came to be, some examples of it, and how it was later criticized. That way, when I make a video about it, for example, Picasso and his struggles with socialist realism, as I did in my previous video, then I can point viewers to this video to understand the doctrine. Socialist realism is not an artistic movement as, for example, social realism is. It's a doctrine. I think explaining the difference between social realism and socialist realism can be important, as I imagine it can be confusing to some. Social realism has its roots in the movement called realism. Realism was pioneered by the socialist, I would call him an anarchist more specifically, Gustave Courbet, who made popular paintings such as A Burial at Ornans and who called himself the proudest and most arrogant man in France. That says a lot about him. Realist artists portrayed ordinary, everyday people, scenes and stories without the idealization of romanticism or of academicism. Think of The Floor Scrapers by Gustave Caillebotte. These are ordinary people working. They're not idealized nor perfect. This is real life. Realism here doesn't refer to how realistic the painting looks, but more how close it is to reality in the choice of subjects and how they're depicted. Millet's The Gleaners is another example. This is a painting of ordinary gleaners gleaning. As seen in the video I made on the Gleaners, depicting such ordinary scenes was seen as an affront to the bourgeoisie. Yes, I said it, the bourgeoisie. And there was definitely a rebellious social aspect to depicting the common people. Social realism became a strong movement in the United States after the Great Depression. Just like European realists, there was the objective of depicting ordinary people. However, there was a will with social realists to overtly denounce injustices, particularly through the angles of race and class. One of my favorite social realists of that period is Ben Shahn, who was also a leftist and who used art through his style and voice as a way to celebrate workers and denounce power and the injustices it creates. Famously, he denounced the execution of the two Italian anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti. Realism, and especially social realism, was critical. It's the complete opposite for socialist realism. Socialist realism is less of a movement that artists joined, identified with, and contributed to. It's rather a doctrine, a set of beliefs about art enforced by the state, which sets boundaries on art. These boundaries, as determined in the same 1934 text I opened the video with, can be summed up through four aspects. 1. Proletarian. 2. Typical. 3. Realistic. And 4. Partisan. Art needs to be made for the people, meaning it has to speak to them and be understood by them. Art needs to be about everyday life. It needs to look like something, no abstraction or barely understandable figures. And it needs to support the party. The first aspect, proletarian, kind of dictates the two next aspects. After the Communist Revolution happened in Russia, there were debates on what kind of art would be created in their new society. Some avant-garde artists wanted to break with tradition, applying the ideas of the revolution to art by thinking of new ways of making art, by experimenting, by creating new art for a new society. Other artists, such as writer Maxim Gorky, an important figure of socialist realist doctrine, believed that experimental art was bourgeois and that it could only appeal to the elite. What the USSR needed was art that was easily understood by the masses, and for visual arts, that meant adopting a conventional academic style, a style that, ironically, has been defended by the elite, the aristocrats, the bourgeoisie, for centuries. A socialist realist I'd like to show you is Isaak Brodsky, an artist born in modern-day Ukraine who studied under Ilya Repin. There's even a portrait of him made by Repin himself. He made paintings of the people at different marches, rallies where you can see Lenin giving speeches, the day of the Constitution, and perhaps more importantly, he made portraits of the Soviet elite. And this is the part where I look up portraits of the Soviet elite and talk about them a bit more casually. So the first one I want to talk about is a portrait of Lenin made in 1919 that is kind of funny, kind of atypical of what you'd normally see, as he either pulls back a curtain a bit like Grant Wood did in another painting, which I made a video about. And here you see Lenin kind of pulling back the curtain and showing a protest or like the revolution itself. I find it amazing the way the curtain kind of frames Lenin in red, obviously, with the back being the whole revolution. It's like a double portrait, the people and Lenin. The red curtain, of course, we see in the portrait of Stalin, which I kind of tried to emulate, ironically. I don't like Stalin, by the way, just making that very clear. There are other portraits of, especially Lenin, where you see that the appeal to Lenin, which is very interesting. It says a lot about the whole idea of what gives legitimacy to power in Soviet Russia. You see Lenin as a worker. Lenin is painted as humble, as just an everyday man, either just standing in the street, as I see here, or working in it's not a luxurious salon, right? Salon? Like your living room, I guess? And he's just working. He looks like a humble man. There's this other portrait of him just sitting on a bench, looking like just your average old man, which is pretty interesting, because this is how you would get legitimacy, right? As a communist leader in the USSR, by showing yourself as just another worker, right? I'm not part of the elite. How could I? There's no elite. In Soviet Russia, there's no elite. Don't worry about it. Okay, that's enough. I feel like you get the gist of it. Actually, I hope so. I hope you do. Many of Brodsky's artworks were made before Socialist Realism was made the official state doctrine, as he died in 1939, 5 years after the first All-Union Congress of Soviet writers. Nonetheless, his art was influential not only in setting examples for the Socialist Realist paintings to come, but also as propaganda. Because yes, and this is not controversial, Socialist Realism is propaganda. And there's nothing inherently wrong with propaganda. I made a video on this subject. But I think the problem with Socialist Realism is that artistic liberty and expression is being limited for the message. Some will say that all art is political and that all art has a message. All art is propaganda, said Orwell. I love when art has a message, a story behind it. I find and share stories and messages behind paintings every time I make a video about them. However, when the message of the artwork becomes more important than the work itself, when the artwork just becomes a pretext for a message, then these images become more propaganda than art. There's a difference between artists who denounce the conditions of workers under capitalism out of outrage, and artists who make art celebrating the state to fit into what the state requires artists to do. And I want to end this video by proposing a new name for Socialist Realism. We can keep the realism, though it's ironic because Socialist Realism was about idealizing both the present and the future, but there's a dystopian quality to calling propaganda realism, which kind of fits. However, I really don't think we can call it socialist, not only because most socialists, especially today, will disagree with Socialist Realism, but also because socialists of the time also disagreed with it. There were Soviet socialist artists, as you'll recall, who wanted the USSR not only to break with tradition and experiment politically, but also be a pioneer in artistic experimentation and break with artistic traditions. Socialist artists from across the world, not only in the USSR, despised the doctrine. André Breton, the father of Surrealism, and Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo's husband and also a muralist, wrote a whole manifesto, potentially with Trotsky, titled Manifesto for an Independent Revolutionary Art. The repugnance which this shameful negation of principles of art inspires in the artistic world, a negation which even slave states have never dared to carry so far, should give rise to an active, uncompromising condemnation. The opposition of writers and artists is one of the forces which can usefully contribute to the discrediting and overthrow of regimes that are destroying, along with the right of the proletariat to aspire to a better world, every sentiment of nobility and even of human dignity. The communist revolution is not afraid of art. It realizes that the role of the artist in a decadent capitalist society is determined by the conflict between the individual and various social forms which are hostile to him. This fact alone, insofar as he is conscious of it, makes the artist the natural ally of revolution. If, for the better development of the forces of material production, the revolution must build a socialist regime with centralized control, to develop intellectual creation, an anarchist regime of individual liberty should, from the first, be established. No authority, no dictation, not the least trace of orders from above. Only on a base of friendly cooperation, without constraint from outside, will it be possible for scholars and artists to carry out their tasks, which will be more far-reaching than ever before in history. Our aims: the independence of art for the revolution for the complete liberation of art. For all those reasons, I believe we should rename Socialist Realism to Soviet Realism. Calling it Soviet Realism would be much, much more accurate. And also, maybe people would understand it a bit better than Socialist Realism. All right. And that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing. If you haven't already, I'd like to thank all my subscribers. Well, all my subscribers too, but all my patrons. That's what I wanted to do. The patrons are the ones scrolling right here. Oh, I should probably put myself in the middle like this so that the top tier patrons can be here and all the other patrons can be here. And among these top tier patrons, there's Roman Brandel, X-Towns, Bone Meal, and Chrissy Chris, who are the top tier patrons who even more top tier. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, next video, maybe on, I'm going to wait to make the video on Begonia, just because I'd like to have the footage of Begonia to talk about it. And it's not necessarily on Begonia, you'll see. But anyway, it's going to come. It'll give you time to watch it. It's a really good movie. I really recommend you go watch it. And if not, my next video is probably going to be on Picasso's Portrait of Stalin, which of course will tie into this week's video, which is on Socialist Realism. You already know that. Anyway, thank you so much. Hopefully you liked the new decor. Hopefully me posing as Stalin is not too bad, I guess. I didn't really think about it too much. But anyway, thank you and see you in the next video.